Now, one of the things with service design and journey mapping is that we have to consider risk and how people perceive risk. So we're all different. Some of us are risk lovers or risk seekers. Some of us are conservative and we don't want to take risks. And some of us are risk neutral. So when you're thinking of that persona, think about their tolerance for risk, okay? And then think about perhaps how COVID and volatility and uncertainty may elevate their risk or unlikely to minimise it, but elevate their risk. So risk is something that, and our risk tolerance, whether we're risk seekers, risk neutral or risk averse, tends to be something that's relatively stable, but in different service environments, it can move. Okay, but generally speaking, as a person, we carry that through our life, our risk tolerance. But what's happened, obviously, is we live in COVID times. And COVID times, there's obviously been a lot of sort of talk about this idea of VUCA for the last 5 or 6 years, but COVID's probably brought it to a head for most people. So it's called VUCA or VUCA world, and it's this idea that we live in a place and times of volatility. There's a high rate of change. There's a high rate of uncertainty, which is the key word we hear about more and more about COVID these days, is that unclear set of what's going to happen now and what's going to happen in the future. There's ambiguity that we're not quite sure and don't have clarity. We don't have full information to make informed decisions. And there's complexity. Things just aren't straightforward. So COVID has brought this sense of VUCA. What this means is that some people will race through the decision process, so it's counterintuitive. What happens is some people shortcut it. So they will see you, they'll make a decision, they'll buy quickly, but they might have regret. They might anticipate, they might bring it back, they might complain because they jumped the process quickly because that's how they've responded to VUCA. In other situations, you'll have people who'll hesitate, who'll drag their feet on decisions, who'll do a lot of buck passing. Just got to ask my wife, just got to ask my kids, just got to ask someone else, just got to ask that person before they make a decision. And these are natural responses to VUCA life, to complexity and to uncertainty. So when your customers are coming through the door in our sort of present times, you need to add this idea that their risk, those that are risk sort of averse, are more likely to be feeling anxious and are more likely to hesitate on purchases. Okay, and more likely to actually procrastinate around decision making. So we know that VUCA influences decisions and perceptions of risk. We don't know what's happening tomorrow. We don't know what's happening in a year's time. So as I said, people will go in two directions. The risk seekers, what you'll find is they'll pump through that decision process so fast, they'll just walk in, I want this, thank you, see you later, and they're out the door. But most people will hesitate. Now, it's important when we talk about risk to sort of look at it from this idea that everything we do carries risk. So when they use your service, they're assessing that risk against everything else that's going on in our life. There is nothing that we do that doesn't carry some element of risk about it. But we often make informed decisions and we often rely on gut instinct, which is based on that risk tolerance, how much risk we're willing to take. But risk can take lots of forms in services. Remember, a service is intangible. It has no physical form. It's an act, a deed, an experience. It's hard to capture. It's hard to trial. And so what happens is people have lots of different risk. If you look at the decision process for buying a good, something that you can touch and feel and hold, you'll find that it's much quicker than a decision process for buying a service. With a service, the lead up, the pre-decision is much more deeper and detailed than for a good. And that's because of it being not having a physical form, which is pretty much what this slide says. This idea is that the literature has shown that, look, marketing is based on practice, so everything we teach is literally based on what people do. So what we know more and more is that goods are considered low risk by people simply because you can touch it, feel it, hold it, and as humans, tactile interaction gives us a sense of confidence and assurance. Whereas when we're buying something that's a service, it actually elevates our sense of risk because we just don't know what it will do and how it will work.